We're gathered here to send a very clear message that enough is enough. Enough is enough when they go to lock up our public lands without any public input.
Yes.
And I want to talk today about what's happening in Washington, what has been happening over the last couple of years, and what needs to be stopped. Last February, you may recall, a memo was leaked from the Interior Department that detailed a quote-unquote wish list from the administration of potentially 17 new national monuments across 11 western states, including Oregon, that if successful would lock up another 13 million acres of land. Without a bit of congressional approval or public involvement. This is wrong. We have lived through this in southern and eastern Oregon before during the Clinton administration, which I'll talk about later. We've had to come in afterwards and clean up the mess legislatively because they left private landowners stranded inside these boundaries and no management plan in place. One of the areas being considered is an expansion of the Cascade Siskiyou National Monument that they're calling the Siskiyou Crest National Monument. This designation would spread into California and lock up another 600,000 acres. How can the Obama administration do this all without getting input from you or the elected representatives you send to Washington or here in your counties? The 1906 Antiquities Act does give the president authority to protect lands for archaeological purposes. That was why it was designed. Lands that contain important historic landmarks, prehistoric structures, or other objects of scientific significance. But it says that it's supposed to be the smallest area compatible with proper care and management of the objects to be preserved. Back when the bill was being written, the argument was over whether to allow a maximum designation of 320 acres or 640. Now they're just randomly using it to get around any public process to lock up any swath of land that they want. As you know, President Clinton he really used this to its extreme. And as a result, we learned about the war on the West out of the Clinton administration. I'm starting to feel a little deja vu. Now, some of these areas are truly unique. Some of them are beautiful, and some of them contain freeways, transmission lines, private property, homes, you name it. The boundaries cut off at the California border, which didn't seem logical, as you know, on Soda Mountain. There was an appearance the administration was listening to the people, but in the end, they really didn't. And in the end, the president declared the Cascade Siskiyou National Monument under the Antiquities Act. Roads were closed, cattle grazing was basically thrown off. Native American worship group that had held an annual spiritual event for at least 3 decades was told they had to cease their worship in the monument. All of that started as a rumor, just like what we're hearing today. Now we have roughly 120 monuments nationwide covering 70 million acres with an average of 583,000 acres per monument. Now, I was a journalism major, not a math major, but that's a little more than 320 to 640 acres. Here's why we're here today. Secretary of Interior Salazar has released in December, Secretarial Directive 3310, which allows his agency, BLM and others within the Department of Interior, to manage these lands. They call it the Wild Lands Initiative. Gives the administration the power to treat BLM land as wilderness, with only just a suggestion from a, let's say, special interest group. You could probably name them. Or a member of Congress putting in a bill that says we think this should be studied this way. It allows the agency, without any other public involvement, to say, okay, we'll draw a boundary around that. We're going to start managing it that way. You get de facto wilderness as a result with no input from the public. Now, I don't know who they were listening to in November, but it wasn't the American people, who said pretty clearly and loudly they were fed up with the government takeovers, the lack of transparency, and the lack of public involvement. So 9 senators and I think 48 members of the House, including me, wrote to the Secretary and expressed our frustration. And I want to read from that letter because I think it sums it up best. We're also concerned that because this action was taken without input from members of Congress and local officials who would be affected by the order, the prospects of a cooperative working relationship with Out Wilderness have been damaged. We believe this order represents a considerable departure from the method of designating lands as wilderness areas specified in the Wilderness Act of 1964. As you know, the Wilderness Act gives the U.S. Congress, and only the U.S. Congress, the power to designate public lands as protected wilderness areas. Secretarial Order 3310 appears to be an underhanded attempt by the Department of Interior to circumvent Congress and the federal rulemaking process. We believe public land should be managed in a way that provides the greatest benefit to the public. Multiple use has been the bedrock for many rural Western economies for decades. This new wildlands policy introduces more uncertainty and will arbitrarily delay the reasonable use and development of our public lands. In order to prevent a collapse of several rural economies in the West and forestall continued uncertainty and job loss in Western public land states, we urge you to withdraw Secretarial Order 3310 and work with the Congress to devise balanced policies for our public lands. Last year, I authored legislation which, under Speaker Pelosi's leadership, went nowhere, as you might guess, that would require that these proposals go through the full NEPA process, and that states would have the right to approve some of these additions. This year, my colleague Devin Nunes and I and some others are sponsoring legislation to get after this very issue in a similar sort of way, requiring review and requiring congressional approval. We are not going to stand for these agencies just on their own volition deciding how these lands are going to be managed without any public involvement. And I'll tell you what, when we're in our 21st month of unemployment above a level none of us can envision, the last thing we need to do is take more land out of production. If the BLM has that kind of time, let's turn them around and say, then let's get the timber sales going on the Bedford District. Let's get the timber sales going so that the plants can stay open and we can put people back to work in this state of ours. Enough's enough. I need your help. I need your help out there to make this case loudly and clearly. Your voice needs to be heard in Washington, D.C. to put a stop to this. We'll do everything we can. I've asked the subcommittee chairman on the Resources Committee, who has jurisdiction in this area, Rob Bishop of Utah, to hold a hearing, and this week he agreed to do so. He's a very good supporter of ours on these issues. So we'll have the secretary before the committee. We'll find out what he has to say, and we'll make it very clear to him that we don't like this underhanded grab of power. We are going to stop these agencies from taking power that we don't believe they have that really rests with the people in the Congress. So I thank you for coming out today. I'd be happy to take any questions from the press who are here, and together we're going to tell them loudly and clearly enough's enough, get our people back to work, provide multiple use in our public lands. Thank you. I don't know if, let's go to the press corps here if they have any questions that, or maybe, I don't know, your microphones may not work from there. I don't know. Paul Faddick.
How's it going, Greg?
It's going well.
I was wondering, you're just focusing on this this letter in particular. Are you saying no more wilderness
Look,
in the future?
so good question. So the issue is, are we focusing on this letter? Are we focusing on everything? You know, at this point in time, in our state and our country, I don't think we need to lock anything else up in wilderness. Let's focus on multiple use management. Let's not lock the public out. I have great reservations about some of the travel management plans that are under consideration. I remember some of these groups when they said, we're going to ratchet down timber harvest and replace the economy with tourism. Now they're coming back, by the way, and saying, they're the same ones saying, we don't want any vehicles up in there. We don't want anything up there other than somebody hiking. Now, I'm a hiker. I'm a backpacker. Not very good at either, but I do both. But there are a lot of people who like to recreate in other ways. And I know I'm meeting with, doing some of the commerce work I'm doing later today and tomorrow, like Motorcycles USA and others that, you know, that sell products around the country. If we shut down where people can recreate, they're not going to sell as much of their product. This does not help our economy. And in this particular case, I just think it'd be nice for once to have the agencies in these groups turn their focus to helping us get Oregonians back to work. And so that's my calling, that's my mission on this. Yes, sir. You've got an aging population. You have veterans and others who come back with disabilities that limit their mobility. So why are we trying to ratchet down access to the lowest common denominator, the healthy young person that can put on a backpack and go in there as long as you're not a group over 25? Then you have to get a special permit. You know, I just think we need to have a different view of our public lands. You know, yesterday I did a town hall over in Lakeview, and 78% of Lake County is publicly owned. You know, you get county after county that in our part of the world that in the 50, 60, 70, 80% public owned. We're going to have a big fight in Washington trying to reauthorize the county payments. Wouldn't it be nice if we got back to where we were generating jobs locally and the mills had the lumber they needed, that we didn't have these catastrophic fires and we didn't have to go begging to Washington to get the federal government to keep its commitment because we were generating the dollars locally. You know, I would start locally, obviously with your commissioners. I think they're on board, by the way. I know they are, but I won't speak for them. Beyond that, we've got 2 U.S. senators. You've got 5 members of the Oregon House delegation. You've got, so you got a whole group of members of Congress. Call, write, go to the town meetings, speak up at events, make your voices be heard, loudly but civilly, which you always do. But you know what I'm saying? I mean, just use every tool at your disposal. Letters to the editor. Get on your internet. Enlist your friends, not only here but around the country. Who else do they? You know, where do you have friends elsewhere in congressional districts where you can help build the support nationally? We just have to head this thing off before we're left with more wreckage and less opportunity. Yes, sir. Right?
All have money specifically earmarked for the acquisition of private property, going from private back into the public domain. The one that brings up to the front of my mind is the CLEAR Act. How about we defund these agencies? It will help our budget deficit.
What a concept. Let me suggest to you that as we go forward, it's not that you want to completely defund some of them, and here's why. Because if they don't have a certain amount of resource targeted in the right way, you don't ever get a timber sale off the ground. And so now let's figure out what our priorities are. And priority number 1 should be how do we get Americans back to work? Priority number 2 is how do we reduce wasteful Washington spending and unnecessary attacks on our freedom. And so that is the message we're driving. That's what we're working on in Washington. And I think you're going to see when we come forward with a continuing resolution to fund the government for the remaining 7 months of this year, a significant reduction in spending in the order of $50 to $60 billion for the remaining 7 months. Now that's just a start, but it's going to echo around the country because I'll tell you what, folks, even things we care about are probably going to get trimmed or cut because you can't borrow 41 cents of every dollar that's spent and send that bill to the grandkids and the next generation and think you're leaving this place better than you found it. In America, if we keep walling off our natural resources, whether it's minerals, whether it's rare earth, whether it's oil, whether it's gas, whether it's trees, we become more dependent on the whims and vagaries of other countries and regions of the world, and that affects our economy and our ability to create good paying jobs here. And it puts us at a disadvantage internationally. So we need to look at these policies and try to move forward. We're going to have to move on. Thank you very much for coming out today. Thanks for your help on this issue.